Yes. So, hi everyone. Welcome to the live stream also, or the stream. This is lecture just called Data, and it's named in vacuum form for a reason, which is that it's quite complex topic to discuss. So of course of data, what most people are nowadays interested is not anything else than big data. And this is just to show you, these are some random images from online about big data. It's really trendy. It has lots of different definitions, from the definition that if your Excel cannot open it, it's not if it's big data, and if it opens in Excel, it's not big data, to something more advanced like the 4 V's. I think it's from IBM that speaks that big data is about volume of the data and like how much you have, velocity, like how much you get more of that data, variety, like the forms of data that you have in usually big data sources, or this kind of computational data is quite mixed, and then velocity that I actually don't remember out of the blue, and it's so tiny that I can read from there. But yes, so this is a commercial definition, and then there's other definitions about this, but this is not the only way that we can speak about data. We already yesterday heard about this kind of ready-made versus custom-made, and also Duncan Watts addressed this exactly same topic with a bit different words. And in statistics, if you've done any statistics, they are speaking about secondary data and primary data. So this is more or less the problem that we are using quite often. Data that wasn't purposed by the researcher for any kind of research aims or any kind of research goals. And therefore we sort of need to do some tweaks and hacks to make it more working like a researcher, like researchers would like to do. So researchers are usually really good at working on custom data, but that's sort of shifting, and that also means that we need to shift some of the things that we are thinking about that. And this talk is actually quite much about speaking about some problems that might emerge when you are using this kind of ready-made data, and also some opportunities. Then it's not the only distinction about data, so I just wanted to highlight something like we can have data from different level of subjects. So we can have data that actually is focused on the individuals, or we can have organizational level data or something like that. That's why I've just called the lecture Data, because the data can be almost everything nowadays. Something that I hate myself with the framing of data is that, of course, even social scientists have had data in their research since early 20th century. Before that, it was sort of less data, but now like there has been data-driven efforts to understand society, both qualitative data, quantitative data, case studies for over 100 years, and now everyone is speaking about data science and data-driven something. And is that actually that new? That's something that we might be discussing more tomorrow. But yeah, we have different levels of data. And then something that people are quite often speaking is this kind of particle data called, some people call it digital footprints. I think that those are more in the field of sociology based on the few references that I've found. But then also people speak about digital trace data, and that's from more political science communities. Already we see that we are using a bit different words for more or less the same meaning. But the idea is that when we are using online services, we leave these kind of traces or footprints about ourselves in that we as a researchers can repurpose and make research out of those. And something else that I don't really like with these two words is that they don't really mean that much. So I just wanted to show that we can have different levels of digital footprint data, that everyone would say that this is digital footprint data all the time from different kind of things. So we can have everything from, this is extremely vacuum again, but we can actually analyze users' context at any point of time quite easy, like what other programs are running, what's happening in the background. If we open the camera of the desktop or of the laptop or the mobile phone, we can actually like literally see what's happening in the background of the user. We can sort of figure out the location. So that's some sort of digital data there, or digital trace data. But then also people are speaking quite often digital traces as, for example, each tweet that's sent. And they are quite different on what we can do, because each tweet is more intentional activity at some given point of time, whereas this would be something more prose. Then of course we have some things between those two ends, like this super detailed and then this kind of less detailed data we have. This kind of, we could actually develop system, and on some versions of the Presemo system that we've been using, not the version that we are using now, but some versions which we've instrumented for our research purposes, actually logged each key press, because we wanted to see how much people are spending time to reformulate their ideas and stuff like that. So we logged each key press that people put on their system. We could also easily log in the position of the cursor. I've written these kind of things to some of my colleagues in lab experiment, because they needed to figure out where the mouse was at any given point of time, and that can be done. Or then, like, quite often, and this is quite often what's missing when social scientists, because this is something that the companies have, but they are not sharing it with us, is that we could have these kind of like actual footprints, like the user was first on this page, then he clicked this page, then he went back to that page, kind of path of the user. So we have these kind of different opportunities to work with this data. Sometimes it's a bit more limited, sometimes it's a bit less limited. And what can we do with this kind of stuff? If you checked Matt's book, he has a list of 10 kind of things. I'm not actually trying to repeat that list. Some things are similar, but I've tried to formulate them more from cases and discuss some of my own experiences at the same time. So something that Sandy or Alex Pentland, who's a famous person, he's invented this kind of thing called reality mining. And this used to be a hot thing, I think, over 10 years ago, actually, 2005, I think, or 2004, or 2006, something like that. So he started to speak that we have this kind of mobile sensors with us. So this was just on the verge of the emergence of the smartphone as a global phenomena. And this was actually sponsored by Nokia, who gave out lots of smartphones at that time to the research group. And what they figured out, that because we have these fancy sensors that we are always carrying with us, and they are always with me, and they actually have quite many sensory capabilities, we can do social science research out of that. So here's just one idea that they sort of gathered from there. So they've asked people who they are friends with. That's that network. And then using the mobile phones, because on mobile phones you can see what is the nearby mobile phones that about in 10-meter radius or something like that. They showed that who hangs out with whom in real life throughout the day using the mobile phone logging data. So this is something that is excellent opportunity in the digital trace data, is that you can have this kind of math calls, it's always on. I would call it maybe even like pervasive things, and that goes deeper. So this is smartwatch, so it's actually on me every time I'm doing something. So we can have these devices that collect us different kind of data, and they can be on the skin of the people. So this is something that social scientists 20 years ago couldn't have been imagining, that okay, we'll just buy people some smartphone, or we buy them some clocks, and then we can gather what they are feeling throughout the day, because you can sort of assume that feeling might be related to pulse or something like that. But yeah, so we have ability to collect data, and we have the ability to collect it outside our lab environment, which is always limited. We have ability to collect it constantly, like in this case, always. Excellent. With some ethical questions emerging, of course. And that was the great bit, and I think that everything that follows is sort of why this might be not working. It might not be in the right balance, because I really believe that some of the work that we are now able to do is really cool and allows us to do more things, but then because there's a bit too much hype, I've become too negative about the thing, and you'll see that in the remainder of the lecture. And we can discuss about these kind of choices, of course. So something that I really like is that there's a famous paper by Dana Boyd and Kate Crawford, both are at Microsoft Research, about critical questions for big data. And they propose 6 questions, but I've taken only few of those, which I find most relevant. So one that Dana is speaking and Kate are speaking a lot is that we need to have the context information for big data, or it loses its meaning. And this actually, this actually goes into whatever data. So I'm actually going to take an example of not a big data example to show what they mean by that. So we have in Finland we have a parliament, and what the parliament has is that the members of the parliament can write written suggestions that we would like you to do something like that, or we would like you to do something like that. And those are all registered, they are open data, so researchers can collect them, and researchers did collect them, and then they showed that over this timeline we actually can see increase happening here, and we relate it to this kind of political happening. And why I'm taking this example is that then what happened is that it was published in a Finnish political science journal, so no one is going to read that, more or less, at least from you guys. But what they did is that they invited an MP to comment those results and try to highlight what's actually happening, do we trust them? And the MP is saying that, okay, your conclusions, like there was an increase, that's clear, but your causal reasoning of that is wrong, because you did not take into account that we actually got more manpower to our parliament during that time when you see this kind of increase. So they moved from, I don't remember, was it from shared assistant to personal assistant or something like that, or was it from 1 assistant per MP to 2 assistants per MP? But there was something like that happening in the system, and more or less they were able to see that in their analysis, but then how they linked that into what they were thinking that they were measuring, the MP at least was saying that, okay, this is bullshit, the analysis is not correct, and the problem is that quite often you take some data, you don't understand the context where it was built, and then you do something and it actually makes sense, but when you actually have someone who has contextual information, you lose the effects, or you get different kind of ideas of the effects. So for me, this is quite often a complicated case. In the end of the presentation, I'm going to speak something that we've been thinking about how we could solve this kind of problem. Then the limited access to big data creates new digital divides. I think this is one of the biggest problems in our research field at the moment, because what they mean by this is that there's inequality. So again, let's take one example of this. There's a small university in Helsinki called Aalto University, and then there's a small university in Massachusetts called MIT. And Twitter, a nice company, they decided that we want to support research. So they contacted this small university at Massachusetts, not at Helsinki, for reasons that I don't really understand. Hello, Twitter people. So they contacted Massachusetts, and they were like, okay, we would want to give you $1 million, and we would like to give you all the archives that we have of our Twitter. And we were speaking of this in Helsinki Institute for Information Technology, that we would just want the archive. We don't even need the money. We would just want the data. But that's one of those inequalities that we are seeing with these kind of big data things. What they are speaking more is that corporate researchers can do different stuff than ordinary researchers, but that's deeper. I think it also goes into this kind of branding and stuff like that. And that's sort of, I think it's that coming from a small Finnish university that doesn't really have that much brand. We've collected some really fancy data sets before. I can tell more about those in the coffee breaks. But this is some of the inequalities that we are seeing, and those are challenging how we do research. It also creates some problems of replication. So let's say that the MIT researchers find something of the whole Twitter archive, and then they publish something. Who's able to say that, okay, this is not the thing that actually happened in the data, because they are most likely the only university who has that whole data set there. And going other ways, so something that Facebook is doing actively is that Facebook is publishing really interesting results about what happens in Facebook. Like really interesting. I was reviewing one paper that I was like, okay, this is really cool. Then I started to look at the data, and I was like, okay, there's a tiny problem with their analysis, which is that I cannot access that kind of data that they are accessing. So either the researchers are doing deep collaboration with Facebook, might happen, or this is a paper from Facebook research. And then I wrote some nasty comments about that in the review. So that's one thing, and I want to say that was this article from 2005? 12. So this is something that was known quite many years ago, and we haven't yet solved the problem because it's a challenging problem to solve, and it's just sad. Mainly it's sad because I'm in a small Finnish university and people are not calling us and saying that we want to give you data and $1 million. And then the claims about objectivity and accuracy are misleading, which more or less say that while we have big data or whatever data, how well that actually relates to real world is something that we can discuss, how accurate it is. And some of those things we actually address later in the presentation, but that's again something that they were able to point out, and this was, I think that this was written as a response to quite many computer science people who were engaging at that point of time with these kind of things. For social scientists, I think that some of these, especially like the contexting and the objectivity thing, are not actually, in my opinion, maybe that's surprising because I think that we've been fighting with that kind of things long time. And even with the data, we have some issues about data access and things like that. Something else that we always need to remember when we are doing our studies, especially when we are doing studies about social media, is that social media is not the whole population. Twitter is not the whole population. This is quite sad, and this is something, I have my own hypothesis why this is happening, is that quite many people, I think like if okay, how many of you think that social media data represents the society? Like before seeing the next slide. Excellent, so there's, Ilse, what?
It depends on the social media.
Okay, it depends on the social media. But yes, this is again something that's intuitively really clear. It's rarely written in the papers in a way saying that, okay, we acknowledge that we have limitations, at least on the papers that I've been reading. If you have been reading different kind of social media papers, I would really want to read the papers that say that we understand that we have some problems around this. I've read some. Not from me?
Not from you.
Oh, great. But this is something that we sort of need to understand when we are working with that data, that it does not represent the whole society, it represents some subset of people, usually a weird subset of people in some way, and they are just making the argument. It's not the only paper. I think that this is Grant Plank is from Oxford Internet Institute, so they've been running this kind of survey about internet behavior for a long time, and it's been nice. So I just chose this paper because I like the paper. But there's plenty of papers. Pew Research, for example, is showing more or less the same things. And this is something that you should just remember when you are doing your analysis. Okay, beyond social media, we have other kind of traces for digital or other kind of places for digital trace data too, and they can have similar kind of problems. So this is not pervasive only for social media. They can also be like, let's say that we are studying people who are using social security services in Finland. We could get digital trace data, but then we would not get those people who are using the paper-based services that still exist, and there are actually most likely a socioeconomical difference in those. So let's say that we would have some finding that everyone gets the support that they need. It might be a finding that we get from digital trace data, but it might be related to the fact that those people who really need support are in such a bad shape that they are not able to use the digital services. The forms don't fit into their or needs, and they cannot communicate those, or something like that might be happening. That would actually be great research question. Then something that I wanted to highlight here is that how we access the data and what is a complete data set. It's an extremely difficult question, so I chose again two, I think, interesting papers. So here's Twitter data that was collected around electoral outcomes in 2010 US House elections or something like that. And what the figure is showing that depending on how you did your search, so if you search for hashtag, you got that amount, and that's kind of community of the whole thing. If you search for the candidate usernames, you get something like that. If you search for free text mention of the candidates and maybe elections or something like that, you got something like this. So depending on how you choose to collect your data, you are getting different data sets. And this means that the idea of completeness is really hard, because we would first need to find from whatever place we have that, okay, what actually relates to this phenomena, how we define the boundaries of that phenomena. And this again goes to other topics also. So let's say that instead of Twitter, we are studying media data or something like that. From all the news, we usually want to narrow down, select some news, or if we are doing a lit review around democracy and politics and stuff like that, we need to first find from everything, all the scientific literature, these kind of things, and then it comes into this kind of question that what kind of words, how we query it from the database. Then something else that I really like is that there's some basic research, not that much. I would really want you to publish more about this kind of stuff, is that how do the APIs that we are using to collect our data influence what kind of data we are getting? And so APIs, we are actually looking at them later today. If you don't know about that, just think that we can call Twitter and ask them to give us data. And here they show that depending on how you call to Twitter and ask the data, you get different kind of data sets that have different characteristics of the data. And then they actually even show that this kind of data set that's supposed to be random is not that random in the end and stuff like that. So because we don't know how they've implemented that, because we are not in Twitter, they've implemented this API somehow, and we can call data from there somehow, but then what data we get, it's sort of a mystery, and we just hope that it's representative and random sample, because if it's not, then many things that we believe are actually false. And quite many more recent researchers have been sort of questioning that, okay, you actually, the random data set that you're supposed to get is not that random, and it has some imbalances in there. Then this is from my own research. Something that I was thinking long time ago was that, okay, how do we understand some of the social science concepts? And to contextualize this research in position, this was written in the time when social network analysis was trendy and hot, and everyone was doing that. And how you do social network analysis is that you collect some sort of network data, and then you say that, okay, this represents friendship. And we can now see a network of friendship ties or something like that. And what we did with fairly small number of people, this was less than 20 people, was that we were able to get them to install a software on their mobile phone that allowed us to log to whom they call and to whom they send text messages. This might not be that easy nowadays, but when we were doing this study, this was totally fine. They were actually willing to do that. And then we had our own campus social network data. And do you think that this network represents the same phenomena? Like, how many of you say that, okay, these are the same network, just in a bit different leagues? I think that we put it so that the same persons are in the same locations in all networks. For clarity, just raise your hand if you believe that these are the same network.
It depends on what the address.
What is?
What's the address have?
For researcher trying to study friendship, would you say that these all represent the same kind of friendship?
How did you get exactly all this?
This is from, so the question was, how did I get this graph? This is that who sends SMSs to whom. This is who calls to whom, and this is who's friend in our online service. So these are, yeah?
I think it's different kinds of friendship. I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but I definitely SMS different people than I call, than I'm friends with on some social media platform.
That's sort of where we get in the paper, is that we have different kind of approaches how to understand friendship, and it depends on what kind of medium do you choose to do that. So let's say that I would be analyzing your friendship based on who you follow in Twitter, and this was quite commonly done at that point of time. We would get an incomplete picture of the whole complexity of friendship. We would get something totally else. If I would check who are your friends in Facebook, that might not represent something, because Facebook is sort of really weird, because at least I have my elementary school friends, then I have my high school friends, then I have some college friends, then I have my work friends, and then there are the people who I actually communicate with. And the actually communication is like 10 or 20 people or something like that. But yeah, and why I wanted to speak so much about this is that we should really understand, when we are collecting some data, that what does the data represent? It might say that it represents friendship. Like it might be Facebook says that these are friends of that people. But the reality might not be that case. It might be something much more complex. And this is something, when we work with data, we quite easily, because we have so much data and we can draw so many interesting plots and figures, we sort of forget every now and then to think that what's actually happening with the data. So this is sort of the context of the data once again. Then this is some unpublished work that I've been working on, which tries to say that people are using the services differently. So this is from elections in Finland, and we have candidates, like what do candidates post in Facebook, what do candidates post in Twitter, what do citizens post in Twitter, and what do citizens post in Facebook around elections and threads of conversation and interaction in elections. And what this figure tries to convince you is that candidates, for example, use Facebook and Twitter quite differently. So that means that our results about social interaction in these services are different depending on if we study Twitter as the venue of social interaction. Then we would have more interaction that would be focused on opinion and sharing and opinion asking, because those are the dots nearby Twitter. Or if we would be studying interaction in Facebook, where we would be getting more formal campaigning and socio-emotional functions, because those are closest to candidates on Facebook. So this was our sort of questioning, is that, okay, what are we seeing here is that people are using the services in different way, and that means that, again, what we are getting from this data and what we should understand depends on what the heck is actually happening and how do people position them. This is another version of the same sort of story, maybe told in a bit different way. So they've asked people in a usual regular survey that what motivates your use of social media services, and they listed a lot of social media services there. And from the figure, it does not have error bars. I don't like the figure at all because it does not have any error bars, but I think that there are some significant differences there. Sadly, I don't remember from the paper, but at least on this like level of mean differences, you can see that some services are used more for entertainment than others. Some are used for self-documentation, for information sharing, for convenience. So this tells us that if we go out and study something, like we want to study a research topic that someone shall propose. Anyone? Any research topic? Well, we study how teenagers communicate with each other. Then if we choose to study it in snapshot, we are getting a different big picture of the whole phenomena than if we study it in the Instagram. And that's different from if we study it in Facebook or Twitter, most likely Facebook and Twitter for teenagers are sort of dead places because those are for more senior. And what I'm trying to again say, this is the same message once more, that how you get your data, trying to understand what's the socio-technical context of whatever platform or whatever system is critical, because these have implications to what you can say that your data actually represents. So something else that I wanted to highlight, and this is my own personal rant about the topic, backed by science, so it's not full rant, is that quite often in research of new communication technology, what we are seeing is that technology changes quite often. Or this is my reading of the paper. The paper does not say something like that, but this is what the results of the paper. So the core result of the paper is that most of the research on new technologies, emerging technologies, like research on social networks or research on instant messaging or research on blogs or research on email, lack theoretical perspective, that they are more driven by empirical description. And for social scientists, this is somewhat difficult, because we are supposed to, like Duncan said, quite often social scientists would want to have this kind of more theoretical contribution, but also this sort of indicates that, or this is my representation of what might be happening, and I believe this to be the case, but of course the paper does not say something like this. So let's say that we start to study social networks. Social networks started in 2006, 2005, we had MySpace, then we had Facebook, Twitter, stuff like that. So everyone rushes to study this new phenomena. But sadly, what happens is that, let's say that for first 5 years they are studying the phenomena, and then we are in 2010. And the whole idea of social network has already changed. So people rush to study the new social networks, not the old social networks, and then they again do 5 years of studies about that, and then now we've had 2 iterations of that research, then we are actually seeing that okay, social networks are not that interesting for people anymore. Everyone is moving into these kind of instant messaging platforms like WhatsApp and Snapchat, so then people rush to study those. And what happens in these kind of cycles, and what's sort of the point that I'm trying to make, is that the technology changes so quickly that the researchers don't really keep up with that. And therefore, we are seeing that having theoretical arguments of those technologies is hard, because once we are in the stage that we are supposed to start moving away from the casual description that this is what we are seeing, people or the phenomena has already changed. And this goes so beyond the argument that I hate this on the theoretical perspective. What I want to also say this is that what we are seeing in especially this kind of online digital space research is that it's in constant flux. So whatever you did 2 years ago in your research thing might not be relevant anymore, or the situation might have changed that your results are actually false nowadays. Like Duncan said, so, and what Matt also speaks, that they are algorithmically bounded, for example, but I would say that they are more technology bounded in a way that these new technologies come in and then they start to affect on what the heck we are seeing in the technology field and stuff like that. And this is my shameless plug on some things that we've been trying to invent to solve this problem, which is that I believe that quite a lot of this kind of research should be more in mixed method nature. So instead of just collecting computational data and do number crunching, which I happen to like because it's easy, you should maybe take something deeper and something more contextual. So we proposed in this work that you could do ethnographic field work, and this ethnographic field work where we had students, to be honest. We had students browsing the social media while they were during the election periods, and they were checking what's happening in Twitter, and they were informing us that okay, there's this kind of new hashtag or this kind of new phenomena. So that informed our data collection strategy already. I don't remember what was some of the highlights, but we could sort of imagine, for example, that there's a new meme image that's really relevant to understand this phenomena, or a new hashtag emerges. So then research would be informed of that. So we bring the context information from humans into computational data analysis. And then something else that we were hoping to solve in this one diagram is that quite often if you do full ethnography, you have certain problems on trying to make arguments about that. Like, because everyone is saying that, okay, this is really nice, but this is more or less few people browsing the internet. So why is it meaningful? But then if you do this kind of, that actually should be computational. Yeah, it should definitely be computational. Then you have the problem that you need to figure out what you want to find from the data. Because once you have lots of data, then the next question is that, okay, what do we want to do? How should we do this? So we started to think that we should have this kind of integration phase next. So let's say that we've collected the data. In ethnography, they write feed notes. So they write what they are seeing, what they are experiencing. So reading that could help us to understand what kind of phenomena and how could we try to understand that phenomena. So in this paper case, it was something that we observed that at that point of time, I think that no one else had been speaking about, or was it? No. Yeah, what happened? What was the core results? But we were seeing that people are sort of, we don't have that. Well, we observed candidate-candidate interaction. And this is something that's not that commonly spoken in the existing research. We speak about candidate-citizen interaction a lot, but not how candidates interact with each other. As the ethnographic fieldwork, we're saying that this is actually happening quite common. They were experiencing that this is quite common. So we quantified that. We started to understand that. And once we started to understand that, we got some ideas how to rephrase some of the ethnographical findings, how to reinterpret those. And together with these two results, we could finally report the findings that were saying that, okay, we are seeing this kind of candidate-candidate interaction. And I want to say, and I did this part, so I did the computational part. If I didn't have the ethnographic data saying me that candidate-candidate interaction is interesting phenomena that's happening, I wouldn't have been looking that kind of thing, because it's not in the existing body of research saying that this is anyhow interesting. And that's the final slide. So do we have any questions about the many cases that I've been showing? Comments? Okay, great. Juho, would you?
Yeah.